group of bears spotted an unconscious human baby. What they did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The moon hung low over Blackwood Forest, its silver light filtering through ancient pines and casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air carried the scent of wild berries and damp moss, mingling with the earthy aroma of the wilderness. In a small clearing, where a gentle stream gurgled over smooth stones, lay a tiny bundle wrapped in a faded blue blanket. The bundle moved slightly, revealing the pale face of a baby, no more than 6 months old, alone and unconscious in the vast wilderness. Her cheeks, usually rosy and full of life, had grown pale in the cool night air. Her tiny fists clenched and unclenched as she dreamed, unaware of her dangerous surroundings or how she had come to be abandoned in this remote part of the forest. Not far away, a family of bears made their way through the dense underbrush. Mama Bear, a massive grizzly with a distinctive scar above her right eye, led the way. Her thick brown fur rippled with each heavy step as she sniffed the air, searching for late-season berries. Behind her trailed her 2 cubs, Scout, the adventurous male with curious eyes, and Nova, the cautious female with a white patch on her chest. They were joined by Old Timber, a grizzled male bear with battle scars and a limp in his right paw, who had mysteriously attached himself to their family group months ago. The bears froze as the wind shifted, carrying an unfamiliar scent toward them, something foreign yet somehow familiar. Mama Bear raised her head, her nostrils flaring as she detected the scent of a human, but there was something different about this one. It wasn't the usual smell of danger that humans brought, no gunpowder, no metal, no strong chemical scents, just something small and vulnerable. Scout bounced excitedly, eager to investigate, but Mama Bear growled softly, a warning to stay back. Old Timber huffed, his eyes scanning the dark trees for any sign of adult humans who might be nearby. The forest had fallen unusually quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. Mama Bear took a cautious step forward, then another, moving with surprising grace for such a massive creature. The cubs followed closely, their soft paws making almost no sound on the forest floor. Old Timber brought up the rear, constantly checking their surroundings for danger. As they approached the clearing, the moonlight revealed the small bundle by the stream. The bears paused at the edge of the trees, their dark eyes fixed on the tiny figure. Scout whined softly, confused by the sight. Nova pressed against her mother's fur, uncertain and afraid. Mama Bear stood perfectly still, torn between her instinct to protect her cubs from anything human and a strange pulling sensation she couldn't explain. A distant wolf howl broke the silence, sending a shiver through the forest. Mama Bear's head snapped up, her ears twitching. The wolves were hunting tonight, and they would surely find the defenseless baby if the bears didn't act soon. Old Timber grunted and took a deliberate step into the clearing, his massive form illuminated by moonlight. His decision was made. Whatever had brought this human child here, whatever strange twist of fate had placed it in their path, they couldn't leave it for the wolves. Mama Bear hesitated only a moment longer before following him, her cubs close behind. The baby stirred as the bears approached, her tiny fingers uncurling as if reaching out to them. A soft whimper escaped her lips, barely audible above the gentle murmur of the stream. And in that moment something extraordinary happened. Something that would challenge everything the forest creatures thought they knew about the divide between humans and animals. The baby's whimper grew stronger, her tiny body shivering in the cool night air. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of the deepest blue, almost violet in the moonlight. Those eyes found Mama Bear's dark gaze and locked on with an intensity that made the massive creature pause. There was no fear in those infant eyes, no understanding of danger, only a pure, unfiltered recognition that transcended species. Old Timber circled the clearing one final time, his heavy paws leaving deep impressions in the soft earth. He sniffed the air continuously, his experienced senses searching for any hint of adult humans nearby. Finding none, he approached the bundle cautiously, lowering his massive head to examine the child more closely. His warm breath stirred the baby's fine hair, causing her to blink in surprise. "We cannot leave her," Mama Bear seemed to communicate through a series of soft grunts and body movements that her cubs instantly understood. Nova hung back, still uncertain, while Scout inched forward, curiosity overcoming his caution. The baby reached up suddenly, her tiny hand brushing against Scout's sensitive nose. The young bear cub jerked back in surprise, then leaned in again, fascinated by this strange, hairless creature that smelled of milk and something sweet he couldn't identify. Nova, seeing her brother's courage, crept forward as well, her eyes wide with wonder. A twig snapped somewhere in the distance, and all four bears tensed. Mama Bear raised her head, nostrils flaring as she caught a new scent, the unmistakable musk of the wolf pack that claimed the eastern portion of the forest. They were drawing closer, no doubt attracted by the same unusual scent that had drawn the bears to the clearing. The baby, sensing the change in atmosphere, began to cry. Softly at first, then with increasing volume. The sound echoed through the trees, a beacon to any predator within earshot. Mama Bear knew they had minutes, perhaps seconds, before the entire forest knew of the child's presence. With a decisiveness that surprised even Old Timber, Mama Bear lowered her massive head and gently closed her jaws around the blanket bundle, lifting the baby from the ground. The child's crying stopped immediately, replaced by a surprised gurgle that almost sounded like laughter. The bears had been gentle with their own young countless times, and Mama Bear knew exactly how much pressure to apply, enough to secure the bundle without causing harm. Scout and Nova watched in astonishment as their mother turned and began moving swiftly back toward their den, the baby dangling carefully from her mouth. Old Timber hesitated only a moment before following, positioning himself as a rear guard against the approaching wolves. The journey through the nighttime forest was tense. The bears moved with surprising speed and silence, navigating familiar paths that would be impassable to humans. The baby remained strangely quiet, as if sensing the need for stealth. Occasionally, her tiny hands would reach up to touch the fur around Mama Bear's mouth, eliciting a rumbling purr from the massive creature. Behind them, the howls of the wolf pack grew closer, then suddenly changed tone. They had found the clearing and the scent of both human and bear. The hunt had begun in earnest. Old Timber stopped suddenly, his ears swiveling toward a new sound, one that made all four bears freeze in place. From the direction of the northern ridge came the unmistakable sound of human voices calling out, faint but growing stronger. They were searching for something, or someone. The bears were caught between two dangers, the wolf pack behind them and human searchers ahead. Mama Bear made a split-second decision, veering off their familiar path toward a steep ravine that few creatures in the forest dared to navigate. The descent would be treacherous, especially with precious cargo, but it offered their best chance of avoiding both threats. As they picked their way down the rocky slope, the baby began to stir again, uncomfortable with the jostling movement. A thin cry escaped her lips, echoing off the ravine walls. Mama Bear froze, her eyes widening in alarm as the sound carried through the night air. Above them, the human voices changed direction, now moving toward the ravine. Someone had heard. At the same moment, the first wolves appeared at the top of the ravine, sleek gray shadows with gleaming eyes. The alpha male snarled when he spotted the bears, revealing long canines designed for tearing flesh. His pack fanned out behind him, preparing to descend. The bears were trapped halfway down the ravine, exposed and vulnerable. Scout and Nova pressed against their mother's legs, whimpering softly. Old Timber moved to stand beside Mama Bear, his massive frame a wall of protection between the cubs and the approaching wolves. Mama Bear gently placed the baby bundle down behind a large boulder, positioning herself in front of it. Her message to the other bears was clear. They would make their stand here, protecting this strange human child that fate had placed in their care. The alpha wolf took a step down the ravine, then another, his pack following cautiously. Old Timber rose to his full height, towering over 7 feet tall on his hind legs, and released a thunderous roar that shook loose stones from the ravine walls. The challenge was issued. They would not yield. From above came the sound of crashing underbrush as the human searchers reached the edge of the ravine. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, dancing along the rocky walls. A man's voice called out, desperate and hoarse with emotion. "Lily! Lily, are you down there?" The baby, as if recognizing her name, released a sudden piercing cry that echoed through the ravine. Every creature froze, wolves, bears, and humans alike, as the impossible situation became clear to all. The father of the lost child stood at the top of the ravine, staring down at 4 massive bears, seemingly protecting his baby from a pack of wolves. And in that frozen moment something unexpected happened. The man saw not monsters guarding potential prey, but fellow parents defending a child not their own. Daniel Russell had been searching for his daughter for 6 tortuous hours. 6 hours since his wife Ilara's frantic call, since the moment he learned that their research camp had been attacked by poachers, that Ilara had hidden baby Lily in the forest before leading the armed men away. 6 hours of imagining every possible horror, of praying to gods he wasn't sure he believed in. Now, standing at the ravine's edge with 3 other research team members behind him, he found himself in a scenario so bizarre it defied all logic. His infant daughter was alive, nestled behind a massive female grizzly that stood protectively over her. A second, even larger bear stood nearby, facing off against a wolf pack that was gradually advancing down the rocky slope. "Nobody move," whispered Dr. Maya Whitaker, the team's wildlife biologist, her voice barely audible over the growls echoing from below. "I've never seen anything like this before." The alpha wolf took another step forward, and the larger bear, an old male with battle scars visible even from a distance, released another thunderous roar that vibrated through Daniel's chest. The wolf hesitated, calculating the risk. "Lily," Daniel whispered, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to rush down the ravine to his daughter, but the rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through years of field research, held him in place. Any sudden movement could trigger an attack from either predator group, with his daughter caught in the middle. The female bear shifted slightly, revealing 2 cubs huddled behind her. Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. She was a mother, protecting not only her own young, but his child as well. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was before his eyes. "The tranquilizer gun," he whispered to Rodrigo, the team's security specialist. "We need to dart the wolves first." Rodrigo slowly reached for the case strapped to his back, movements deliberate to avoid triggering the bear's defensive instincts. As he assembled the dart gun, Daniel's mind raced, trying to understand how Lily had ended up in this impossible scenario. Had the bears found her after Alara hid her? Had they somehow sensed her vulnerability and chosen to protect rather than harm? Below, the standoff continued. The wolf pack had spread out, looking for weakness in the bears' defense. Two younger wolves attempted to circle around, seeking a path down that might give them access to the rear of the bears' position. Old Timber noticed the movement and shifted to block their route, but this created a gap in the defense line. The alpha wolf saw the opportunity and lunged forward, aiming for the space between the bears. Mama Bear reacted with shocking speed, her massive paw connecting with the wolf's ribs and sending him tumbling back with a yelp of pain. The message was clear. There would be no easy victory here. Above, Rodrigo had the dart gun ready. "I have a shot on the alpha," he murmured, his eye to the scope. "Take it," Daniel whispered. The dart flew silently through the air, striking the alpha wolf in the shoulder. The creature snapped at the foreign object, then turned his angry gaze upward, spotting the humans for the first time. A snarl rippled across his features before the fast-acting sedative began to take effect. His legs wobbled, and he stumbled slightly. The pack reacted with confusion, some members looking to their leader for guidance while others growled threateningly at both bears and newly discovered humans. A second dart found its mark in a large female wolf, and she too began to show signs of the sedative's influence. The standoff had escalated into a three-way confrontation, with Daniel's team now actively involved. The female bear, the one guarding Lily, turned her attention briefly upward, dark eyes locking with Daniel's. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended species barriers. She knew he was the baby's father. With deliberate movements, the mother bear nudged baby Lily further behind the boulder, positioning herself so that she blocked access from both the wolves and the humans. The message was clear. She would decide when and if the child would be returned. "Daniel," Maya whispered urgently, "what if we back away? Show them we're not a threat." Daniel hesitated, every fiber of his being resistant to the idea of moving away from his daughter. But Maya's suggestion made sense. If the bears had wanted to harm Lily, they would have done so already. Instead, they had protected her, carried her to safety. There was something extraordinary happening here, something beyond normal animal behavior. "Okay," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Everyone back, slowly. Keep the dart gun ready, but target only the wolves." As the research team carefully retreated from the ravine's edge, taking cover behind the tree line, the two sedated wolves finally collapsed to the ground. The rest of the pack, seeing their leaders incapacitated and facing formidable opponents in the bears, began a strategic withdrawal, slinking back up the ravine and disappearing into the night forest. They would hunt easier prey tonight. With the immediate danger past, the mother bear turned her full attention to the tiny human bundle behind the boulder. Baby Lily had begun to cry again, the sound echoing up the ravine to where Daniel listened with his heart in his throat. Every instinct told him to rush down the steep slope to his child, but Maya's restraining hand on his arm held him back. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see what they do now that the wolves are gone." What happened next would challenge everything Daniel thought he knew about animal behavior and intelligence. The mother bear gently nosed the crying bundle, then looked directly up to where the humans had been standing minutes before. She made a soft grunting sound, and the old male bear moved to take up a watchful position, guarding against any return of the wolves. Then, with extreme gentleness, the mother bear once again took the blanket bundle in her mouth and began to climb the ravine. Not away from the direction of the humans, but directly toward them. "She's bringing Lily back to us," Maya breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes were witnessing. The bear's climb was slow and careful. Her precious cargo never jostled. The two cubs followed, staying close to their mother's flank, while the old male remained at the bottom of the ravine, ensuring no predators followed. Daniel watched, barely breathing, as one of nature's most feared predators carried his infant daughter up the treacherous slope with more care than many humans would have shown. At the top of the ravine, the mother bear paused, her dark eyes scanning the tree line where she knew the humans waited. Lily had fallen silent again, as if sensing the importance of the moment. With slow, deliberate steps, the bear moved forward, crossing the invisible boundary between wild and human worlds. Daniel stepped out from behind a tree, alone and unarmed, his hands visible at his sides. The mother bear stopped, studying him with intelligent eyes that seemed to contain centuries of wisdom. For a long moment, man and bear regarded each other, two parents connected by an impossible circumstance. Then the bear lowered her massive head and gently placed the blanket bundle on the ground. She took 3 careful steps backward, positioning herself between the baby and her own cubs, who watched the proceedings with obvious curiosity. Daniel approached slowly, tears streaming down his face. He knelt beside the bundle and carefully unwrapped it to reveal his daughter, miraculously unharmed, her eyes bright and alert as they found his familiar face. He gathered her into his arms, choking back a sob of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to the bear, knowing the words were inadequate but unable to find others. The mother bear watched for a moment longer, then made a soft huffing sound to her cubs. As the reunited human father and daughter embraced, the bear family turned and began to make their way back down the ravine, where the old male waited patiently for their return. But this extraordinary encounter was far from over. It was merely the beginning of a relationship between species that would challenge everything humans thought they knew about the animal kingdom. And for Daniel Russell, it was the start of a journey that would change not only his life, but possibly the fate of the entire Blackwood Forest. The research station's main cabin buzzed with tension and disbelief as Daniel recounted the night's events to the assembled team. Baby Lily slept peacefully in a makeshift crib, exhausted from her ordeal, but miraculously unharmed. Outside, the night had given way to the first hints of dawn, painting the forest with soft gray light. "It's unprecedented, Doctor," Maya Whitaker repeated for the 3rd time, pacing the length of the cabin. Her gray-streaked hair was tied back in a hasty ponytail, her eyes bright with scientific excitement. Bears adopting or protecting other species' young is virtually unheard of. There are rare cases of captive bears showing interest in human babies, but in the wild, and to this extent, it defies everything we think we know about ursine behavior. "They didn't just protect her," Daniel insisted, his voice still raw with emotion. "They understood. That mother bear looked me in the eyes and she knew who I was to Lily. I swear it." Dr. Arjun Mehta, the team's neurobiologist, looked skeptical. "I'm not dismissing your experience, Daniel, but we have to consider the possibility of anthropomorphizing. In moments of high stress and emotional intensity, humans often project—" "I was there too, Arjun," Maya interrupted. "What those bears did goes beyond normal protective instincts or curiosity. They made decisions. They problem-solved. They navigated between 2 threats, wolves and humans, and then made a choice to return the baby." Rodrigo Santos, still cleaning the tranquilizer gun at the table, looked up. "Has anyone heard from Alara? Any word on the poachers?" Daniel's face darkened at the mention of his wife. "Park rangers found her 10 miles south. She's injured but alive, broken ankle, dehydration, exposure. They're transporting her to Memorial Hospital now." He glanced at his watch. I'll take Lily to see her as soon as it's light enough for the helicopter to land. Dr. Josephine Chen, the team's newest member and a specialist in interspecies communication, had been quiet throughout the discussion. Now she leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Daniel, you mentioned the older male bear. Can you describe him again? Daniel closed his eyes, recalling the massive creature that had stood guard at the bottom of the ravine. Huge, bigger than any grizzly I've seen in Blackwood. Old, too, scarred muzzle, graying around the face. Moved with a slight limp in his right front paw. Josephine exchanged a significant look with Maya. It could be him, the bear from the Mackenzie study. What study? Daniel asked. Maya sat down, suddenly looking tired. About 15 years ago, Dr. Richard Mackenzie ran a controversial research program about 50 miles north of here. He was studying ursine cognition, specifically, attempting to teach a small group of bears to understand simple human commands and symbols. Like the great ape language studies? Arjun asked, his skepticism evident. Similar concept, different methodology, Josephine replied. Mackenzie believed bears had cognitive capacities that rivaled primates, but had been underestimated due to their different social structures. His star subject was a young male grizzly he called Titan, who supposedly demonstrated understanding of over 60 different visual symbols and could follow complex multi-step instructions. Daniel stared at her. You're saying one of the bears that saved my daughter might be a bear that was taught to understand humans? The scientific community largely dismissed Mackenzie's work as methodologically flawed, Maya said carefully. There were concerns about observer bias, and his funding was pulled before a peer review. But if your description matches, and if that bear is indeed Titan... She trailed off, the implications hanging in the air. Then he might have understood exactly what was happening with Lily, Daniel finished, and helped the mother bear make decisions that saved my daughter's life. The cabin fell silent as the team absorbed this possibility. Outside, birds had begun their morning chorus, oblivious to the paradigm-shifting discussion happening within the wooden walls. Rodrigo cleared his throat. There's something else we need to discuss. The poachers. All eyes turned to him. They weren't just any poachers, he continued grimly. From what Alara told the Rangers, they were specifically targeting your research data. They knew the camp layout, knew where the servers were kept. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. Daniel's blood ran cold. The behavioral algorithms? Rodrigo nodded. Most likely. Your predictive models for wildlife movement patterns would be worth millions to the right buyers. Trophy hunters, exotic pet collectors, commercial trapping operations. For the past 3 years, Daniel and Alara Russell had been developing sophisticated tracking and prediction systems that could forecast animal movements across large wilderness areas with unprecedented accuracy. Originally designed to help conservation efforts, the technology had obvious applications for those who wanted to exploit wildlife rather than protect it. Did they get the data? Maya asked quietly. Ilara managed to initiate the emergency purge protocol before fleeing with Lily, Rodrigo replied. But they took the backup drives, and they'll be back once they realize what they have is encrypted. They're not going to give up easily. Daniel looked out the window at the lightning forest, somewhere in which a family of bears had done the impossible to save his daughter. So, we're dealing with 2 extraordinary situations simultaneously. Bears exhibiting unprecedented cognitive and empathetic behavior, and dangerous criminals who may return at any moment. There's more, Josephine said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everyone turned to look at her. The Pinewood Corporation filed permits last month to begin logging operations in the eastern section of Blackwood. What? Maya's voice was sharp with shock. This is protected land. Not all of it, Josephine replied. The boundaries were redrawn last year under the Resource Management Optimization Act. Nearly 40% of Blackwood is now open for sustainable resource extraction. Their words, not mine. Daniel felt as if the floor were tilting beneath him. That's where the mother bear's territory is, where all of this happened last night. The implications were clear. The bears that had saved Lily's life were about to lose their home to chainsaws and logging trucks. The helicopter radio crackled to life, announcing its approach to the research station's landing pad. Daniel stood, gathering his sleeping daughter carefully in his arms. I need to get Lily to her mother. When I return, we need to have a plan. For the data, for the poachers, and for those bears. I owe them a debt I can never repay, but I'm damn well going to try. As he stepped out onto the porch, the first full rays of sunrise spilled over the eastern mountains, illuminating the vast ancient forest that stretched in all directions. Somewhere out there, a family of bears was returning to their den after a night that had changed everything. And on a distant logging road, the first heavy equipment was already being moved into position, ready to begin the destruction of a world that humans were only just beginning to understand. Memorial Hospital smelled of antiseptic and artificial air, a stark contrast to the earthy scents of the forest Daniel had left behind. Baby Lily squirmed in his arms as they made their way down the sterile corridor, her tiny nose wrinkling at the unfamiliar environment. A nurse led them to Alara's room, her soft-soled shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "She's been asking for you both," the nurse said, pausing outside room 317. "She's stable, but still quite weak. Try not to overwhelm her." Daniel nodded, then stepped through the doorway, his heart catching at the sight of his wife. Alara Russell lay propped against white pillows, her normally vibrant face pale and drawn, dark hair tangled around her shoulders. An IV line trailed from her arm, and her left leg was elevated, encased in a fresh cast. But it was her eyes that struck him most. The usually bright, inquisitive gaze was haunted, carrying shadows he'd never seen before. "Lily," she whispered, arms reaching out. "Oh my God, Lily." Daniel carefully placed their daughter in her mother's embrace, watching as Alara broke into silent tears, pressing her face against the baby's head. For several minutes, no one spoke. The family simply existed together in a bubble of grateful reunion. Finally, Alara looked up at Daniel, her face wet with tears. "How? Where did you find her?" Daniel pulled a chair close to the bed and took his wife's free hand. "That's complicated." He hesitated, unsure how to explain what had happened. "Alara, what exactly happened at the camp? How did Lily end up in the forest?" Pain flickered across Alara's features, not physical pain, but something deeper. "They came just after midnight, 3 men, armed. I was up with Lily. She had a fever, remember? I heard them before they reached the main cabin." She swallowed hard. "They were talking about the servers, about the data. They knew exactly what they were looking for, Daniel. Rodrigo mentioned that. Someone leaked information about our work." Alara nodded grimly. "I grabbed Lily in the emergency bag, initiated the data purge, and slipped out the back before they reached the main building. I thought I could circle around to the emergency vehicle, but one of them spotted me." Her voice faltered. "I ran into the forest. I knew I couldn't outpace them with Lily, so Her voice broke, fresh tears spilling. "I found a sheltered spot near the stream, wrapped her in extra blankets and hid her there. Then I kept running, making as much noise as possible to lead them away from her." Daniel squeezed her hand, his throat tight with emotion. "You saved her life." "I abandoned our baby in the wilderness," Alara whispered, anguish plain on her face. "What kind of mother does that?" "The kind who had no choice," Daniel said firmly. "You made the only decision you could in an impossible situation." He hesitated, then added, "And Lily wasn't alone for long." Alara looked up, confusion in her reddened eyes. "What do you mean?" Carefully, speaking in measured tones to avoid sounding like he'd lost his mind, Daniel recounted the events of the night. The bears finding Lily, protecting her from wolves, and ultimately returning her to him. As he spoke, Ilara's expression shifted from disbelief to wonder, to something like recognition. "I know how this sounds," Daniel concluded. "If I hadn't seen it myself—" "I believe you," Ilara interrupted, her voice suddenly stronger. Daniel blinked in surprise. "You do?" Ilara adjusted Lily in her arms, the baby now sleeping peacefully against her chest. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I discovered in the data analysis last month that I haven't shared with the team yet." She glanced toward the door to ensure they were alone, then lowered her voice. "The behavioral anomalies we've been tracking in the bear populations, they're not random, Daniel, they're evolving." "Evolving how?" Daniel asked, leaning closer. "The decision trees are becoming more complex. Year over year, the bears in Blackwood are exhibiting increasingly sophisticated problem-solving behaviors, especially the females with cubs." Ilara took a deep breath. "At first, I thought it was a flaw in our observational methods or the algorithms, but I've checked the data every way possible. Something is changing in how these bears think." Daniel sat back, processing this information. "And you think this explains what happened with Lily?" "I think," Ilara said carefully, "that we've been so focused on measuring and predicting animal behavior that we failed to notice they've been watching and learning from us too." She looked down at their sleeping daughter. "Maybe the mother bear recognized Lily as a cub. Maybe there's more to animal cognition than we've allowed ourselves to believe possible." A knock at the door interrupted them. A tall man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, his presence somehow filling the small hospital room. Behind him hovered a nervous-looking doctor. "Mr. and Mrs. Russell," the man said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I'm Victor Hargrove, CEO of Pinewood Corporation. I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to personally express our concern about the attack on your research station." Daniel stood, instinctively positioning himself between the visitor and his family. "Mr. Hargrove, I wasn't aware that logging companies took such personal interest in research scientist welfare." A thin smile crossed Hargrove's face. "We have many interests in Blackwood Forest, Mr. Russell. Sustainable resource management is only one aspect of our operations there." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, offering it to Daniel. "When you have a moment, I'd like to discuss a potential collaboration between your research team and Pinewood. I believe we could help each other." "Help each other how?" Daniel asked, not taking the card. "The technology you're developing to track and predict animal movements could be invaluable for minimizing wildlife disruption during our operations, and we have resources, financial and otherwise, that could significantly advance your research." Hargrove's gaze shifted to Ilara and Lily. "We're also very concerned about security for your family after this troubling incident. Pinewood maintains an excellent private security division." The implication was clear: protection in exchange for cooperation. Ilara's voice cut through the tension. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hargrove, but I'm quite tired. Perhaps this discussion could wait for another time." Hargrove inclined his head in a gesture of polite acquiescence. "Of course, Mrs. Russell. I wish you a swift recovery." He placed his business card on the nearby table. "My direct number's on there, day or night should you reconsider." With a final calculated smile, he departed, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. Daniel moved to close it, but paused as he overheard Hargrove speaking to someone in the hallway. "They're still processing what happened. Give them time. They'll see reason. After all, we hold all the cards." A second voice responded, too low for Daniel to make out the words. "No," Hargrove replied, his tone hardening. "I want those bears unharmed and contained. Their behavior patterns are the key to everything. Find the den." Daniel quietly closed the door and turned back to Ilara, his expression grim. "I think we just found out who hired those poachers." Ilara clutched Lily tighter to her chest. "What does he want with the bears?" "I don't know," Daniel replied, "but I intend to find out. And whatever it is, I'm going to make sure he doesn't get it." Outside the hospital window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, casting long shadows over the distant outline of Blackwood Forest. 3 days later, with Ilara still recovering in the hospital, Daniel returned to the research station with a renewed sense of purpose. Lily remained with her mother, under the watchful protection of Rodrigo, who had reluctantly traded his outdoor gear for a suit jacket that barely concealed his shoulder holster. The poachers hadn't been found, and after overhearing Hargrove's conversation, Daniel wasn't taking any chances with his family's safety. The mood at the research station had changed during his absence. Equipment had been unpacked and set up in a frenzy of scientific excitement, transforming the main cabin into an impromptu command center focused on one goal: finding and observing the extraordinary bears that had saved Lily's life. Dr. Maya Whitaker looked up from a topographical map spread across the central table as Daniel entered. "Welcome back. How's Ilara?" "Improving," Daniel replied, setting down his backpack. "The doctors say she can be discharged in another few days, though the ankle will take weeks to heal properly." He surveyed the busy room. "I see you've been productive." "We've mapped the most likely locations for the bear's den based on previous tracking data," Maya explained, gesturing to red circles marked on the map. "If the mother bear is who we think she is, the one we've been tracking for the past 2 seasons, then she's established a territory in this Eastern Valley section. Right where Pinewood is set to begin logging," Daniel noted grimly. "Exactly. Their permits go into effect next week." Maya pointed to blue lines drawn across the eastern portion of the map. "They've already started building access roads along the northern perimeter." Daniel processed this information with a growing sense of urgency. "Have you had any success locating the den?" Dr. Josephine Chen approached from the communications station, tablet in hand. "Not yet, but we've got drone surveillance running along the most probable routes. If they're moving between known feeding grounds and water sources, we should spot them within the next 24 hours. "And if we do locate them?" Daniel asked. "What then?" Maya and Josephine exchanged glances. It was Dr. Arjun Mehta who answered from his position at the monitoring station. "That's been the subject of considerable debate in your absence, Daniel. We're divided on the best approach." "Divided how?" Maya sighed. "Some of us believe we should maintain strict observational protocols, drone surveillance, remote cameras, minimal human interference. Others—" She glanced at Josephine. "Others believe this situation warrants more direct interaction." "Define direct interaction," Daniel said carefully. Josephine stepped forward, her expression earnest. "Daniel, if these bears, particularly the older male, have been exposed to Mackenzie's research methods, they may already understand certain human communications." We have an unprecedented opportunity to build on that foundation. You want to try to communicate with wild bears, Daniel stated flatly. I want to prevent Pinewood Corporation from capturing or killing them, Josephine countered. Because make no mistake, that's exactly what Victor Hargrove intends to do. Daniel's mind flashed back to the overheard conversation at the hospital. He said he wanted them unharmed and contained. That their behavior patterns were the key to everything. Which aligns with information I've uncovered about Pinewood's subsidiaries, Dr. Chen continued, swiping through screens on her tablet. Specifically, Biosynth Laboratories, a research division focused on neural mapping and cognitive enhancement in mammals. She handed Daniel the tablet, displaying a confidential research abstract. They've been working on a project called Bridge Protocol for over a decade, attempting to decode and replicate animal cognitive patterns. Daniel skimmed the document, his concern deepening with each paragraph. They're trying to create some kind of human-animal neural interface? More like trying to understand how certain animals process information differently than humans do, Josephine explained. Bears, for instance, have remarkable spatial memory and problem-solving abilities that operate on different neural pathways than our own. Biosynth believes these cognitive structures could be mapped and potentially replicated to enhance human cognitive capabilities. So, Hargrove wants our bears because they've displayed unusual intelligence, Daniel concluded. Not just unusual intelligence, Maya interjected. They've shown empathy, moral reasoning, and interspecies communication, the holy grail of cognitive research. Daniel set the tablet down, his decision made. We need to find those bears before Pinewood does, and we need to understand what's happening with them on their terms, not as potential research subjects. You're suggesting we attempt direct communication, Josephine said, unable to hide her excitement. I'm suggesting we try to warn them, Daniel clarified. If Hargrove is sending teams into the forest to locate their den, those bears deserve a chance to protect themselves and their cubs. The cabin fell silent as the implication of his words sank in. They were scientists, trained to observe rather than intervene, but the extraordinary circumstances demanded extraordinary measures. How would we even begin to communicate with them? Dr. Arjun asked, breaking the silence. Even if the older male was part of Mackenzie's study, that was 15 years ago. Josephine moved to a dusty bookshelf in the corner of the cabin and pulled out a worn leather journal. Before I joined this team, I spent 6 months tracking down Mackenzie's original research materials. Most of it was lost when his funding was pulled, but I managed to locate his field journals. She opened the book to reveal pages of handwritten notes and crude symbolic drawings. These are the visual cues he used to communicate with Titan. Daniel studied the symbols, simple geometric shapes paired with specific actions or objects. Did Mackenzie document any success with these? According to his notes, Titan could recognize and respond to 23 distinct symbols by the end of the study, Josephine explained, turning pages to show progression in complexity. The most advanced was a combination that roughly translated to danger coming, move to safe place, which is exactly what we need to communicate now, Maya observed. Daniel nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. We'll need to locate the den first. Then we can attempt contact using Mackenzie's methods, but we'll need to be careful. If Hargrove's people are already searching the forest... A sudden commotion at the communications station interrupted him. Arjun called out, "We've got something." Drone 3 has visual confirmation of the bear family. The team rushed to the monitors where grainy footage showed 4 bears moving through a dense section of forest about 3 miles east of the station. The mother bear led the way, her cubs close behind, with the massive old male bringing up the rear. They were traveling purposefully, heading deeper into the Eastern Territory, directly toward the area where Pinewood had begun construction. "They're moving toward the logging roads," Maya said, concern evident in her voice. "They must have heard the equipment." Daniel studied the footage, noting how the bears moved with clear intention rather than the random wandering typical of foraging. "They're scouting. The mother is showing the old male something specific." "How can you tell?" Arjun asked skeptically. "Look at their behavior." Daniel pointed to the screen. "See how she pauses at specific points? How she looks back to ensure he's observing? She's not just leading, she's demonstrating." Josephine leaned closer to the monitor. "If she's aware of the logging operation, she might be showing him the extent of the human encroachment on their territory, which means they already know they're in danger." Daniel concluded grimly. "We need to intercept them before they encounter Pinewood security teams." He turned to Maya. "How quickly can we get to that location?" "On foot?" "About 2 hours if we push hard." "Too long." Daniel shook his head. "We'll take the ATVs up to the ridgeline, then proceed on foot from there. It should cut the time in half." He began gathering equipment from around the cabin: binoculars, radio transmitters, a tablet loaded with Mackenzie's symbols, and, after a moment's hesitation, the tranquilizer gun. "You're planning to go now, just like that?" Arjun asked, clearly uncomfortable with the rapidly evolving plan. "We don't have time for debate or committee approvals," Daniel replied firmly. "Every hour we delay gives Hargrove's people more time to find those bears. I won't let that happen." He looked around the room, meeting each team member's eyes. "This isn't just about scientific discovery anymore. Those bears saved my daughter's life. I owe them a debt, and I intend to repay it." Maya was already pulling on her field jacket. "I'm coming with you." "Me too," Josephine added, clutching Mackenzie's journal to her chest. Arjun hesitated, then sighed in resignation. "Someone needs to monitor the drone feeds and coordinate from base camp. I'll stay and keep eyes on the forest. But Daniel," he added seriously, "if you encounter Pinewood personnel out there, remember they're likely armed and operating under Hargrove's orders. Be careful." Daniel nodded grimly, checking the tranquilizer darts one final time before securing the case to his belt. "If all goes well, they'll never know we were there." The forest smelled of pine resin and damp earth as Daniel, Maya, and Josephine made their way through the dense underbrush. They had left the ATVs at the ridgeline as planned and continued on foot, following the drone's coordinates to the last known location of the bear family. The midday sun filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, creating a kaleidoscope of light and shadow that seemed to shift with each step. "Drone 3 reports they've moved northeast." Arjun's voice crackled through their radio. "They appear to be heading toward Hawthorne Ridge." Daniel adjusted their course accordingly, leading the small team deeper into territory that saw few human visitors. Unlike the western portions of Blackwood Forest, which featured maintained trails and occasional ranger stations, this eastern section remained largely untouched, one of the reasons Pinewood had targeted it for logging. "The old-growth forest in this region is over 300 years old," Maya observed, her voice hushed with reverence as they passed beneath towering giants that had stood since before the American Revolution. Some of these trees were saplings when the first European settlers arrived. "And Pinewood plans to turn them into furniture and paper products within a month," Josephine added bitterly. "All legally approved, of course." Daniel stopped suddenly, raising his hand for silence. Ahead, the forest floor showed signs of recent disturbance. broken branches, disturbed earth, and most tellingly, large paw prints pressed into the soft ground. "They came through here recently," he whispered, crouching to examine the tracks. "Within the hour, I'd guess, 4 distinct sets of prints, the mother, 2 cubs, and the old male." He pointed to the largest tracks, which showed a distinctive drag mark on the right side. The limp in his right paw. Josephine consulted her tablet, comparing their location to the topographical map. Hawthorne Ridge has several cave systems that would make ideal den sites. If they're moving in that direction, they might be relocating due to the logging activity. Or setting up a secondary refuge, Maya suggested. Bears often maintain multiple shelters within their territory. A distant mechanical rumble interrupted their speculation, the unmistakable sound of heavy equipment operating somewhere to the east. Daniel's expression darkened. "Pinewood is working faster than we anticipated. The permits shouldn't be active for another week." "Since when do corporations wait for the ink to dry on permits?" Josephine muttered. Daniel made a quick decision. "We need to split up. Maya, continue tracking the bears toward Hawthorne Ridge. Josephine and I will investigate the logging operation. If Pinewood is violating the terms of their permits, we can use that to buy more time." Maya nodded, accepting the radio transmitter Daniel handed her. "What's my objective once I locate the bears?" "Observation only," Daniel instructed. "No contact attempts until we regroup. If you spot Pinewood security, withdraw immediately and notify us." With Maya heading northeast, Daniel and Josephine altered their course toward the source of the mechanical sounds. As they moved through increasingly disturbed forest, areas where undergrowth had been trampled and smaller trees pushed aside to create vehicle access, the sounds grew louder until they reached the edge of a newly cleared area. From their concealed position behind a large fallen log, they observed a disturbing scene. Heavy machinery, bulldozers, excavators, and industrial logging equipment formed a perimeter around a central command tent. Workers in Pinewood uniforms moved purposefully around the site, but it was the figures dressed in tactical gear that caught Daniel's attention. At least 6 armed men patrolled the clearing, their movement suggesting military or specialized security training. "Those aren't standard logging security," Daniel whispered, raising his binoculars for a closer look. "Look at their equipment, tactical vests, sidearms, and those rifle cases." Josephine's face had gone pale. "What are they preparing for? This is supposed to be a simple logging operation." Before Daniel could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the command tent. Victor Hargrove himself, immaculately dressed despite the rugged surroundings. He consulted briefly with one of the armed men, examining something on a tablet before pointing toward Hawthorne Ridge. "I need to get closer," Daniel murmured. "Close enough to hear what they're saying." "That's too risky," Josephine protested. "If they spot you—" "I'll stay in the tree line," Daniel assured her. "Keep the radio channel open. If anything happens, contact Arjun immediately." Before she could object further, Daniel was moving, using the natural cover of the forest to circle the clearing while staying hidden. Years of fieldwork had taught him how to move silently through wilderness, and he used every skill at his disposal now, freezing whenever a guard looked in his direction, advancing only when attention was directed elsewhere. Finally, he reached a position close enough to the command tent to overhear fragments of conversation. Hargrove's voice carried clearly in the still forest air. "Timeline has accelerated. The mother bear has demonstrated cognitive capabilities beyond anything we anticipated. The neural mapping alone would be worth billions in the biotech sector." A second voice responded, too low for Daniel to make out the words. "Tranquilize the cubs and the old male if necessary," Hargrove continued. "But I want the mother taken alive and unharmed. Her brain structure is the key." Daniel's blood ran cold. They weren't planning to simply remove the bears from the logging zone. They intended to capture them for biosynths research, likely destroying the very neural structures they hoped to study in the process. A sharp crack behind him, the sound of a breaking twig, was his only warning. Daniel began to turn, but something hard connected with the back of his head, sending him sprawling. Through blurring vision, he saw tactical boots approaching before darkness claimed him. When consciousness returned, it came with the sharp taste of blood in his mouth and the ache of bound wrists behind his back. Daniel found himself seated on a folding chair inside the command tent, facing Victor Hargrove across a portable field desk. "Dr. Russell," Hargrove said, his tone conversational, as if they were meeting for coffee rather than in the aftermath of an assault. "I had hoped our next conversation would take place under more civilized circumstances. Your tenacity in protecting these bears is admirable, if misguided." Daniel tested his restraints, zip ties, pulled tight enough to bite into his skin. 2 armed guards stood at the tent entrance, while a third, presumably the one who had struck him, stood directly behind his chair. "You're operating outside your permit boundaries," Daniel said, his voice rougher than he intended. "The Eastern Ridge isn't approved for clearing until next week, and Hawthorne Ridge is excluded entirely due to the cave systems." Hargrove smiled thinly. Always the scientist, focusing on technical details. "You're right, of course, but by the time any regulatory body investigates, we'll have what we came for." He turned the tablet on his desk so Daniel could see the screen. A live feed from helmet cameras showing teams of armed men moving through the forest in a coordinated search pattern. "Your bears will be secured within hours. The mother's cognitive structures will revolutionize neural interface technology." "You're planning to kill her," Daniel stated, the words bitter in his mouth. "I prefer to think of it as advancing human knowledge through necessary sacrifice," Hargrove replied smoothly. "One bear's brain to potentially cure Alzheimer's, enhance human intelligence, perhaps even achieve direct machine-mind interfaces. The possibilities are endless. And the cubs, the old male, what happens to them?" Something flickered across Hargrove's face. A moment of genuine regret, quickly masked. Collateral outcomes in pursuit of a greater goal. "Surely, as a scientist, you understand the concept of acceptable losses." Daniel leaned forward, ignoring the guard's warning hand on his shoulder. "Those bears saved my daughter's life. They displayed intelligence, compassion, and moral reasoning beyond anything we've documented in their species. Killing them isn't science, it's murder." Hargrove's expression hardened. "Your emotional attachment is clouding your judgment, Doctor. Russell. Biosynth has been researching ursine cognition for 15 years. The bear your daughter encountered represents the culmination of that work." Daniel froze, the implications of Hargrove's words sinking in. "What are you saying?" "Mackenzie's research wasn't discredited, Dr. Russell. It was acquired. By us." Hargrove stood, moving to a secure case in the corner of the tent. "Titan, your old male bear, was our first success. But the mother," he continued, unlocking the case to reveal a stack of research journals similar to the one Josephine had found. "She represents something far more significant." "Mackenzie was working for you," Daniel realized, the pieces falling into place. "The whole time." "Initially as a contractor, yes. When his academic funding was pulled, we offered him a more lucrative arrangement, one with fewer ethical oversight committees." Hargrove returned to his desk with one of the journals. "His work with Titan was groundbreaking, but limited by the bear's age and established neural pathways. So you bred from him," Daniel concluded, disgust rising in his throat. "The mother bear is Titan's daughter, yes, born in captivity, subjected to neural stimulation from birth, then released into the wild for the final phase of our experiment. Hargrove's voice carried a note of pride. We've been monitoring her development remotely for years, watching, waiting for her cognitive capabilities to fully manifest. Daniel struggled to process this information, his mind racing. The poachers at our research station— "We're never after your data, Dr. Russell," Hargrove interrupted. "They were there to retrieve our tracking implant from the mother bear. It malfunctioned 3 weeks ago, just as she was exhibiting the advanced behaviors we've been waiting for." He shook his head in apparent frustration. "Your wife's interference complicated matters considerably." "Where's Josephine?" Daniel demanded, suddenly remembering his colleague. "Dr. Chen is being escorted back to your research station as we speak. We have no quarrel with your team, Doctor. Russell, as long as you stay out of our way." Hargrove consulted his watch. "Now, I'm afraid I need to oversee the final phase of our operation. Let me go with you," Daniel said quickly, seeing a possible opening. "If the mother bear really is as cognitively advanced as you claim, a familiar human presence might prevent unnecessary violence. She knows me. She returned my daughter to me." Hargrove considered this, clearly weighing the potential benefits against the risks. "An interesting proposal. Your presence might indeed facilitate a smoother capture operation." His eyes narrowed. "But understand this, Dr. Russell. My security team has orders to use whatever force is necessary to secure our primary objective. If you attempt to interfere, the consequences will be severe." "I just want to prevent needless bloodshed," Daniel replied, meeting Hargrove's gaze steadily. "Both human and bear." After a long moment, Hargrove nodded to the guard behind Daniel. "Cut his restraints. Dr. Russell will be joining our field team." As the zip ties were sliced away, Hargrove leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A word of advice. These bears are not what you think they are. They are the product of 15 years of controlled genetic selection and cognitive enhancement. Don't make the mistake of anthropomorphizing them simply because one of them returned your child." Daniel rubbed his wrists, restoring circulation to his hands while keeping his expression neutral. "I'll keep that in mind." Outside the tent, the logging camp had transformed into a military-style operation. Teams were gearing up with tranquilizer guns and capture equipment, checking radio frequencies and reviewing topographical maps. Daniel was provided with a field jacket bearing the Pinewood logo, a transparent attempt to make him appear as part of their operation should any forest rangers or environmental inspectors happen upon them. As they prepared to move out, a commotion erupted at the perimeter of the camp. One of the search teams was returning, supporting a limping member whose leg was wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage. "What happened?" Hargrove demanded as medics rushed forward. "We found the den site, sir," the team leader reported, his face ashen. "Old caves on the north face of Hawthorne Ridge, but they were waiting for us. The big male, he ambushed us when we approached. It wasn't normal bear behavior, sir. It was like he was implementing tactical countermeasures." Daniel felt a chill run through him at these words. If Titan had indeed been part of Biosynth's experiments, had he somehow retained not just language recognition but strategic thinking as well? Hargrove's expression darkened. "Casualties? Johnson's got a bad laceration, but he'll live. The bears retreated deeper into the cave system after the initial attack. We've established a perimeter, but those caves are a maze. We need the thermal imaging equipment to proceed." "Prepare the full capture protocol," Hargrove ordered, turning to his security chief. "I want the mother sedated and secured within the hour. Use maximum force on the male if necessary." "Sir," The team leader interjected hesitantly. "There's something else. We found signs that someone else reached the den before us. Boot prints, equipment markers. They weren't ours." Hargrove's gaze snapped to Daniel, suspicion flaring. "Your other colleague, Dr. Whitaker." Daniel kept his expression carefully neutral, though his heart raced. Maya had found the bears before Pinewood's teams, but had she attempted contact? Had she somehow warned them of the approaching danger? As the capture teams mobilized, loading equipment into rugged off-road vehicles, Daniel was placed in Hargrove's personal transport, a modified SUV with reinforced chassis and tinted bulletproof windows. The vehicle lurched forward, leading the convoy toward Hawthorne Ridge and whatever awaited them there. In the enclosed space of the SUV, Hargrove continued reviewing data on his tablet, occasionally issuing orders via a secure radio channel. Daniel kept silent, observing and listening, gathering whatever information might help him protect the bears when they reached the den site. "You're very quiet, Doctor." "Russell," Hargrove remarked after several minutes of tense silence. "No further moral objections? No impassioned pleas for the bear's freedom?" "Would it make any difference?" Daniel asked simply. Hargrove's smile was cold. "Number. But I expected more resistance from you, given your emotional attachment to these animals. I'm still processing the fact that you've been experimenting on wild animals, releasing genetically manipulated predators into a public forest, and apparently operating a secret research program outside any ethical oversight for 15 years. Daniel replied evenly. "Forgive me if I need a moment to formulate an adequate response to that level of corporate malfeasance." The SUV jostled over rough terrain as they left the cleared areas and entered the dense forest leading to Hawthorne Ridge. Through the windows, Daniel could see the ancient trees giving way to rocky outcroppings as they gained elevation. The ridge itself loomed ahead, a wall of stone thrust upward by geological forces millions of years in the past, its face pockmarked with the dark openings of cave entrances. As they approached the forward position established by the first team, Hargrove's radio crackled to life. "Sir, we have a situation," came an urgent voice. "The thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures deep in the cave system, but they're moving in patterns that don't make sense for wild animals." "Explain," Hargrove demanded, suddenly alert. "They appear to be constructing barricades at key junction points within the caves. And, sir, we've detected another human heat signature with them, a woman." Daniel's heart sank. Maya had not only found the bears, she was now trapped with them as Pinewood's capture team closed in. Hargrove's cold eyes fixed on Daniel. "It seems your colleague has complicated my operation once again, Doctor. Russell, for her sake, I hope she doesn't resist extraction." The SUV came to a stop among a cluster of vehicles and equipment stationed at the base of the ridge. Armed personnel moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter while specialists prepared tranquilizer guns and capture nets. The cave entrance loomed above them, a dark maw in the stone face of the ridge from which emanated a palpable sense of watchful waiting. As Daniel stepped from the vehicle, the forest around them had fallen unnaturally silent. No birdsong, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold between the humans and the extraordinary bears that had made Blackwood Forest their home. "Bring Dr. Russell forward," Hargrove ordered, gesturing to the cave entrance. "Perhaps he can convince his colleague to cooperate before things become unpleasant." The cave mouth yawned before them, a dark gash in the stone face of Hawthorne Ridge. Cool air flowed outward, carrying the earthy scent of dampness and mineral deposits. The security team had established powerful lights at the entrance, their harsh beams cutting through the darkness but penetrating only a short distance into the twisting passageway beyond. Daniel stood at the threshold, keenly aware of Hargrove and his security chief close behind him. Ahead lay unknown dangers, the labyrinthine cave system, potentially hostile bears, and somewhere within Maya, possibly injured or trapped. Behind him stood armed men with orders to capture the bears at any cost. His position was precarious, balanced on a knife edge of conflicting loyalties and unclear choices. "Dr. Whitaker," he called into the darkness, his voice echoing down the stone corridors. "Maya, it's Daniel. Can you hear me?" Silence answered him, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the cave system. The security team shifted nervously, their tranquilizer guns raised and ready. "Your colleague either can't hear you or is choosing not to respond," Hargrove observed coldly. "We're wasting valuable time." "The acoustics in cave systems can be deceptive," Daniel countered, buying time as he considered his options. "Sound doesn't travel in predictable patterns through these passages." The security chief stepped forward, consulting a tablet displaying thermal imaging of the cave interior. "We have multiple heat signatures approximately 200 meters in, at a junction where 3 passages meet. 1 human-sized, 4 ursine signatures of varying sizes." "All 5 in the same chamber?" Daniel asked, noting the implications. If Maya was indeed with the bears and unharmed, it suggested a level of acceptance, perhaps even cooperation, that exceeded even his expectations. "Affirmative," the security chief replied, "and they appear to be waiting?" A young technician approached Hargrove, nervousness evident in his hurried movements. "Sir, we've completed the preliminary mapping of the cave system based on ground-penetrating radar. It's more extensive than we anticipated." He handed over a tablet displaying a 3-dimensional wireframe of the ridge's interior. A complex network of natural tunnels, chambers, and narrow passages spreading like veins through the stone heart of the mountain. Hargrove studied the image with a deepening frown. "Multiple exit points?" "At least 7 that we've identified so far, sir," the technician confirmed. "Most are too small for human passage, but a bear could navigate them easily. They could be planning an escape through one of the secondary exits while we focus on the main entrance," the security chief suggested. "Or setting a trap," Hargrove countered. He turned to Daniel, calculation evident in his eyes. "Dr. Russell, it seems your expertise is required after all. You'll lead the first team into the cave system. If your colleague and our research subjects can be convinced to come peacefully, all the better. If not—" He left the threat unspoken but clear. Daniel weighed his limited options. Refusing would likely result in his immediate restraint and a more aggressive approach from the security team. Cooperating might at least give him the opportunity to warn Maya and potentially find a way to help the bears escape. "I'll need a radio," he said finally, "and I go in alone, at least initially. A group of armed men will only escalate the situation." Hargrove smiled thinly. "Your concern is noted, but my men have their orders. You'll be accompanied by a 3-person team. Minimal presence, but adequate security. The bears may recognize you, but I'm not willing to bet millions in research investment on their continued goodwill." Within minutes, Daniel found himself equipped with a headlamp, radio, and basic protective gear, leading a team of 3 security personnel into the cave mouth. The men moved with the disciplined quiet of military training, their tranquilizer guns held at ready positions. Each also carried a sidearm, lethal backup if the situation deteriorated. The temperature dropped noticeably as they moved deeper into the ridge, the natural stone insulating them from the summer heat outside. Water trickled down the walls in places, collecting in small pools on the uneven floor. Their headlamps cast jumping shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own, creating an atmosphere of lurking threat where none might exist.